Truthspresso episode 123.
Face it, we all would rather sleep in this morning. That's why God gave us espresso, to kickstart our zombified corpses into hyperdrive. And now, giving your mind and soul the morning shot of truth it craves. This is Truthspresso with Daniel Minnick.
Well, this is Daniel Minnick, and another day driving into work in the morning, and another day for another episode of Truthspresso Express. So, what shall we talk about this morning? Well, I was looking at a few articles, and as I'm pulling out of my lot here, getting ready to head on the main drag, I'll just say that I was looking at some articles last night that kind of fall under this whole banner of medical stuff. You know, that virus that seems to have captured the minds and souls of the media for a while. And I was looking at some articles related to the fact that the media, as Orange Man Bad, has said during his tenure in the White House, you are fake news. Whoopsies, my phone slipped there, because I record into my phone using a headset, monaural headset, so that it makes sure that I can still hear what's going on even as I'm listening to what I'm saying and recording. And my phone just slipped off next to me, but I got that back up if you heard a little sound there. So, as I was saying, as Orange Man Bad said during his tenure in the White House, you are fake news. And even as Orange Man Bad is not in the White House, there is still instances of fake news related to the dreaded virus, and that's what I want to talk about here. So the first headline up for grabs that I'm going to discuss came from, I believe it was the Kansas City Star, and it talked about a certain Children's Mercy hospital in Kansas City. They said that it hit capacity as COVID cases were spiking. So apparently the news outlet there, looking at the spike in COVID cases back in, I believe it was July, if I remember correctly, cases were spiking up, so they wanted to make sure that there was some correlation between that. Correlation does not prove causation, and the headline, doesn't really say that, but it wants you to conclude that there's a causation. So it said that Children's Mercy in Kansas City, or at least the Kansas City Star was reporting it, that a Children's Mercy hospital hit capacity as COVID cases spike. So in other words, as COVID cases going up, they wanted to make sure that, unlike the previous year, we realized that COVID was hitting children especially hard at this time as the cases were going up. Now, of course, we know that cases just mean people test positive for COVID, not necessarily that they are, ill or even severely ill. Now, I know that there have been a lot of more severely ill people as a result of kind of COVID along with other things, and I think that lockdowns and other measures that have kind of weakened people's immune systems until this year is causing people to get more ill. And of course, since COVID, even this Delta variant is especially transmissible, especially contagious, that now means that COVID is going to come in the back door of other even serious illnesses. And of course, what's going to be reported about is that it's COVID and not, necessarily the pneumonia that sent someone to the hospital, but oh no, it's COVID. I'm not trying to put down the severity of COVID, but I want us to understand, possibly some of the problems that top-down government tyrannical measures have brought on and have, I think, caused this pandemic to go on longer than originally expected. Because I believe that any kind of top-down measure that doesn't take into account other possibilities, like it just says there's only one possibility. You do this or bad things happen, and there's no scientific method to that when you don't allow other considerations and a more decentralized way of managing things. But I digress. The Kansas City Star reported that Children's Mercy Hospital hit capacity. So what grounds did they have for that? Well, apparently that was fake news, because a Children's Mercy Hospital decided to report in response to the media, saying that no, in fact, they had plenty of capacity. Now, they acknowledged that there was a rise in COVID cases, and they said, I believe they said out of the 300 some beds they had, they only had 19 kids with COVID in the hospital at the time. And of course, that the kids could be there for pneumonia or RSV, especially, as we'll see. But if you test positive for COVID, you're considered a COVID patient. So 19 kids with COVID in the hospital, many likely suffering from something other than COVID, because Children's Mercy reporting, and I'll provide links to all these articles that I looked at in the show notes. But Children's Mercy said, if you're seeing a spike in if you're seeing that there are more kids in the hospital right now, it's because of RSV and not COVID. And the hospital actually explained why that was. They actually did say that because of the lockdown measures last year, kind of pushing back the spread of RSV, that this year now we're making up, as it were, lost time for that now we're getting all these RSV patients, all these RSV cases at once. And so, what they were dealing with mostly was RSV. They said something to the effect that, what you're seeing is RSV, not COVID. And, so to the mainstream media, everything's COVID, because COVID is the political virus. RSV is not, even though RSV is substantially more detrimental to kids, young kids, than COVID ever was. And I don't see any strain of COVID right now that imposes a serious threat to kids unless it's coupled with some other problem. But RSV, as we all know, RSV is always a scary thing every single year. And some kids get deathly ill, and some even die from it. I mean, I want to mention in passing that my wife has worked as a nurse in our early years of marriage, and she did, had to tell me one evening as she came back from the hospital that, she tried to revive a very young child, a baby, with RSV. They did everything they could, and that baby passed away with RSV, and that was very incredibly heartbreaking and gut-wrenching. And that's how serious RSV is. But, who cares about RSV when you're the mainstream media? Everything's COVID. But in this case, they had the gall to say that Children's Mercy Hospital hit capacity. So what does that imply? to anyone reading that article who might have a sick kid. If the hospital is hitting capacity, and if possibly other hospitals are hitting capacity because COVID is just, thrashing society, then, maybe it's not worth it for me to bring my kid into the hospital, even though my kid desperately needs it for something, COVID, or maybe even not COVID, like, say, RSV. And so you have propaganda like that from a fake news article that could potentially discourage people, discourage parents, scare parents into not bringing their ill child to the hospital to get much needed care. Why? Because my narrative. Because, we've got to make sure that the rise in COVID cases equals a rise in kids in the hospital from COVID struggling to survive. And that was not the case, and Mercy Hospital, Children's Mercy, did not in any way come close to hitting capacity. And so, yes, the hospital understood what the media article would potentially cause. They would potentially cause parents not to bring their children to the hospital, and the hospital wanted to set the record straight. They were not hitting capacity. There was plenty of room, so they said, if your child is ill, bring your child here. There is plenty of room. We will not be turning away kids. There are plenty of beds. And so, what I want to say to the media is, how dare you? You could be responsible for kids, having a serious condition or even dying because of your scaremongering, because you want to promote a narrative. And why? Politics. I've told my wife many times, and, I'd like to say to our listeners here on Truthspresso, politics. Maybe we should get rid of politics from healthcare, and while we're at it, get rid of politics from everything else. Politics should have nothing to do with anything at all. Let's just get rid of politics altogether, okay? Politics have nothing to do with me going to work, earning money for my family, giving to charity, going to church, whatever function that I normally do, on my own, voluntarily. But all politics does is to seek control of people's lives and try to misinform people, try to pit people against people when they otherwise wouldn't be pitted against them. They would otherwise, potentially, if they met them, got to know them, be friends. And politics is a tool of those in power to maintain their power and create narratives because they want to get people on their side to keep them in office, riding the gravy train of making money off of propaganda and not having to put in a hard day's work of doing something that's productive to society. That's what politics is all about. Okay, so let me get off that rabbit trail and say, so because of politics, because of my narrative, Kansas City Star reported fake news, and a hospital had to respond, and they responded with a major truth bomb that, excuse me, if anything, we're getting RSV patients. We're not at capacity, mind you, but, we have a spike in RSV patients this year because we're getting them all together at once because we didn't see them last year because of lockdown measures, which is politics. And so, Kansas City Star, I really hope, but of course I haven't seen any evidence of it, but eat your words. And now, there's another fake news article that I'd like to get to that was more recent. It was it had to do with ivermectin, because people were saying that taking ivermectin which is a drug that's been around for 50 years for treating things like malaria or parasites especially. And of course there are versions of and doses of ivermectin that are used to treat animals. And so, perhaps there have been some people who have took the horse dose and overdosed on it. So a lot of people now are calling ivermectin horse dewormer, but that's not what ivermectin is. In its totality. Yeah, sure, ivermectin can be given to horses to try to deal with a parasite problem, but ivermectin is also used for human beings, for things like parasites and for things like coronaviruses. And I'm no medical expert. I am not a virologist and epidemiologist. I'm just a lay person running a podcast. But that doesn't mean that I can't have the authority to point out, along with other news articles, that there was a news article that said something to the effect that patients were overdosing on ivermectin, and they were overloading a hospital, and so the hospital was having to turn away patients with serious conditions, including gunshot wounds. So someone was shot by a gun, and the ambulance was trying to take him to the hospital, but they basically had to park outside the hospital, try to call in, and they had to sit there because there was no bed ready to take care of a gunshot wound, because the hospital was getting overloaded with people desperately, foolishly overdosing on ivermectin, because they didn't want to take the vaccines, and they were foolish non-medical experts taking horse dewormer in a last-ditch effort to help themselves to medical quackery rather than take the vaccines because they're conspiracy theorists, and somehow there were enough of them to overload a hospital and deny care to people with actual serious conditions that weren't self-imposed, like a gunshot wound. So that was completely fake news. And the doctor, the quote that they had from the doctor there, as speaking from the hospital there about the condition, the problem there, that doctor had not been on staff at the hospital for several years, and he did not say those things. And so the doctor had to basically say, I never said that. This is fake news. And so now there's, a lot of articles, a lot of media outlets are letting us know that that was fake news. Well, why would that be fake news? Do you really honestly think that this was honest journalism, completely objective, someone who doesn't want to believe some kind of severe COVID narrative and doesn't want to make sure to scare people away from the idea that ivermectin could actually help some COVID patients, because there was I think it was last year sometime, there was someone who was struggling for life and in the hospital with COVID, and basically a judge ordered that the person be allowed to have ivermectin administered to them, but then the hospital was having a hard time getting a doctor or any kind of medical professional willing to administer ivermectin, because there's so much political stigma now about it. There's so much political stigma to administer something that is not the politically sanctioned high priest medical profession bureaucracy approved methods that are patented and stand to make a lot of money from a select few drug companies, the big pharma there. And so we can't have it. We just can't administer something that might actually work, because heaven forbid. Yes, I understand that a lot of them probably, because if they believed the narrative, or they were afraid of the political backlash, if this patient in, basically on death's door were administered ivermectin, and somehow, regardless whether ivermectin helped or not, if the patient didn't get better, they probably could have all that backlash and end up being fired or have their medical license suspended because they gave someone a drug that didn't help them. They were following quackery and so on. So yes, I understand the fear there, but that's what politics causes. But someone did provide ivermectin to that patient, and there were signs that that patient was going to get better, that the ivermectin was helping. So that's ivermectin there, and the politics surrounded it, and that's why there's a scare. So back to our original article, the fake news article that the hospital in Oklahoma was getting overloaded because of having to care for patients that were overdosing because of ivermectin, or rather horse dewormer. That didn't happen at all. The doctor that they quoted wasn't there and didn't say that, and the hospital was not overloaded by people overdosing on ivermectin, and the hospital was not having to turn away people with serious conditions, including someone with gunshot wounds. So yes, the question again, is this honest journalism that made a mistake, or is it because we want to promote a narrative? Yeah, in both of these cases, it seems obvious that it's not honest journalism making a mistake, but obviously a narrative wanting to be promoted for political reasons. And politics thrive on crises. And so if there isn't enough bad news about what you want there to be bad news about, so that you get the results that you want that have to do with more political power concentrated on yourself or your allies or your ideology, then you're going to make up some fake news. So, I'm getting close to work, and I'm about to pull into the parking lot at work, so this is going to bring to conclusion this episode of Truthspresso Express. And I'd have to say, I'll just quote a verse. I don't remember the reference, but I believe it was from Hosea, that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And yeah, it seems that just like in Israel, where the priestly class there were not speaking knowledge, as Malachi said, and it seems that way in the United States. The high priest political class is not speaking truth. They want to bamboozle people. They want to not speak God's truth and God's liberty, but put people in bondage to fear, so that they give up their liberties, so that they give up their Christian freedom for the sake of government control, fear-mongering, getting people to take whatever 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 shots that will ultimately be necessary and keep a pandemic going, even if it's mostly in the minds of people. I'm not discounting the fact that there are a lot of people ill, because I think the government didn't handle the pandemic properly. But, if there's not enough bad news, then create some.
thank you for waking up with Truthspresso. Good morning, and God bless your day.
Hey friends, Daniel Minnick here again. If you liked waking up to this episode of Truthspresso, I would really appreciate it if you would rate it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever application you use to listen to Truthspresso.